It's story time with the Histories, with your hosts, Matt Marine and Jen Dumas.
All right, Jen, I'm kind of worried about this episode.
Okay.
Not because of the content, not because of any of that sort of stuff. I'm worried that by the end of this episode, I'm going to become like the real life version of that Always Sunny in Philadelphia Charlie conspiracy meme. Do you know the one I'm talking about?
I
I'm
do
pretty
not.
sure we've referenced it before.
Really? Because I'm not sure I do.
It's the Pepe Salvia meme, and Charlie's working in the basement, the mailroom of some like actual like law firm or something
Yeah.
like that, and he keeps like trying to figure out who this guy is, and he's like, he's not real, and the Pepe Salvia is a real guy, he's just not getting his mail, and Charlie's like all whacked out. But there's this like great element
Yeah.
in the meme where like Charlie, he's got like a cigarette dangling from his mouth, and this hair is all crazy, he's got this deranged look, and then behind him is this like one of those pictures with the string connecting you know what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
But it makes absolutely no sense. It's just this super busy, convoluted, like half melted sort of conspiratorial design. And the guy looking at it, his friend Mac, is just like, you have lost your mind, right? And I'm really worried that I'm going to become like the audio personification of that total insanity after we get done telling this story.
So basically what you're saying is after we're done with this, people are going to think you're crazy. You may think you're crazy.
I might think I'm crazy, but
I already think you're
look,
crazy, so it's not going to really impact me.
the research, the history is on my side here on this one. You know, this is a research-based podcast. We don't come at the listener with things that are half-baked or kooky. We have a responsibility. And so it took a year of reading and deconstructing and getting into the weeds of, and I just am super excited to get this out of my brain and onto a recording.
So we're going to think you're crazy, but then we're going to realize you're not crazy, and it's going to just get us to question every single thing we've ever known and may lead us to insanity. Well, that's good.
Yep. You guys are going to be stuck in here with me by the time this is all done.
That is a frightening concept, Matt.
All right, let's get to it. We got to get this out of my head. My brain's
Okay.
leaking.
Hey everybody, this is your host Jen Dumas along with fellow host Matt Breen, and you are listening once again to Storytime with the Histories, the podcast focused on world history stories that are sometimes bizarre, often entertaining, but always factual. Last week we started our investigation of like the strategy of tension by exploring that whole story of the Weather Underground. And if you haven't listened to that, you should go ahead and do that because it's crazy what you're going to hear. Today we're going to go on a little bit different, more international flair. And we are going to go to Italy. So, if you want some context for today's episode, definitely go back and listen to our first one. But if you are here for some European history feel, definitely stay with us. We're going to explore the Italian years of lead. And we're going to see some true implementation of the strategy of tension. And as Matt said, it's going to be a wild one. It's going to be a wild one.
This one is crazy. And so just like with our Weather Underground series, we have a very extensive bibliography. A lot of research went into this one to try to make sense of this event. And really and truly, like all joking aside, there are a lot of conspiracies. There's a lot of misinformation and disinformation that exists because of how people have consumed this historical event, what they've posted online. There has been some pretty irresponsible media created in Italy, in the United States, in Germany, in places that dealt with post-War II fascist-based violence. And so what we really wanted to do was try to get the facts as best we could and to explore this history in a way that makes a lot of sense. So we will have a complete works cited, just like last time. Our main source that we used to unpack this years of lead story from a context that made sense for our overarching series on the strategy of tension is Daniel Ganzer's NATO's Secret Armies, Operation Gladio, and Terrorism in Western Europe, which was written in 2005. I was able, through the Internet Wayback Machine, to find a uploaded PDF version of this book.
Ooh, very nice.
And we will provide a link to that in the show notes for anybody who wants to check this out. The complete book is available, and it delves into not just events in Italy, but all across NATO in the 1950s, 60s, 70s, 80s, and even into the 90s. It's a pretty fascinating story, and a lot of the claims made stand up. when you look at the
Oh,
historical
nice.
evidence. So it's a very good source overall.
So I want to talk a little bit about conspiracy theories because
Mhm.
one of the things that really bothers me, and I know bothers you too, is when you get individual people who don't have a history degree. And I'm not saying that I'm not trying to be elitist here, but I'm being honest with people, right? Who read a single book written by a author and that's been published. And again, publishing is not like was 50 years ago. There's not as much I mean, anybody could publish anything at this stage of the game. And then
Yes.
they base their entire argument on this one author's perspective and this one book. And as someone, and like with both of us who have master's degrees in our fields, one of the biggest
Well, you
issues.
have a master's degree. I don't. We got to make sure right away.
You have a master's degree.
Not in history.
Oh,
Yeah. So
you
just
should.
to be clear, that's
But
why I'm a historist and you're a historian.
I'm not a historian. But like I would say that you're a historian because I know the research that you do going into any project and how detailed and fastidious you are with your research, so we're just gonna go with that. But, like, historiography is one of the biggest things. It's like the first class you take in your master's program, right? And it's how to research and study history, and the importance of fact checking, and the importance of looking, to other authors. Do they agree with this? Is there comparable evidence from different perspectives? And conspiracy theories drive me crazy because nobody seems to fact check anymore. And it drives me insane.
Yeah. Well, what you're talking about here is this idea of conspiracy theory,
Mhm.
right? This idea that I have a thought about these events, and if I connect the dots based on something I read here or something I think there, or like the like ever omnipresent on the internet, like, huh, isn't that weird sort of
Yeah, right.
thinking that like one might make some jumps, some leaps of faith, if you will, that the evidence, if you actually start to comb through the archives and look at the vast amount of information available, would not support the supposition
Right.
that leads to a conspiracy theory. Yeah, and that's a real problem.
It
And it's
is.
a real reason why political violence occurs. Again, one of the reasons we undertook this series is because of this rise in political violence that we're seeing globally
Mhm.
this century. And a lot of it can be ascribed to half thought through ideas about events, connections that are made in the moment between what somebody already believes, a preconceived idea or notion, and whatever initially was reported on the ground. And social media and the internet have only
Oh,
made
man.
that worse.
100 times worse.
Um, but this has been a problem going all the way back to the printing press. Like,
Yeah.
really and truly, right? Like,
Yeah.
if we just kinda think about, like, when did this the mass dissemination of information that is, available after printing press technology, and then each new iteration of technology after that, radio, television, internet, etcetera, has removed more and more of the guardrails. And so what we have are lots of conspiracy theories. However, dear listener, this is factually a conspiracy that we're going to talk about here today. This is not a theory. There's an actual nefarious group of actors who are going to set about a violent um, plan. They're set about forming a violent plan that eventually will lead to what are known as the Anni di Piombo in Italy,
Well
the
done
years
this
of
time.
lead. Yeah, yeah, right. So before we even get into this, I do think like just some basic overarching, because this is one of those ones where we highly recommend check out the outline that we're posting in the show notes. The outline is pretty extensive. We're not going to quote it chapter and verse here in the podcast because it becomes just way too confusing, way too fast. However, do check out that research, check out the synthesis and fact checking and all the things that you talked about, Jen, because it is worth the time to really understand this. But the years of lead occurred during a time period that's roughly 1967 to 1982. Some people say, well, the context of the years of lead are also the years of lead, so you got to go back to the early 60s. It's the same sort of thing we ran into with the Weather Underground. Like, to understand the Weather Underground, you got to go back to SDS, which means you're going back to the 60s.
I was
And
gonna say you could trace this all the
you
way
can
back.
you
You
just
can't
keep
that's
going back.
yeah.
Yeah, it's addicted to context,
Yeah.
as Dan Carlin says. Um, This time period is known in Italy as the Long 70s, and it pits the Reds, the communists, whose main avatar are these student-led Red Brigades, against the Black, which are these right-wing fascist-oriented groups such as the Fasci de Azione Rivoluzionaria, the Ordine Nuovo, Gladio, and a group known as Propaganda Due. And we'll translate all that sort of stuff for the listeners. That's the best Italian I can do.
Pretty
Right.
good, I'm not gonna lie.
Thank you.
That
I
was a
appreciate it.
solid effort.
Hey, thank you. I appreciate A for effort. We love it. Right. Now, we're going to focus mainly in this episode on right wing violence as opposed to left wing violence. And the reason for that is we did look a lot at left wing violence in our Weather Underground series. And what the Red Brigades engage in is very similar to what the Weather Underground engaged in terms of their bombing campaigns and their interactions with the public and all that sort of stuff. So we don't want to just retell the new story and just change the setting.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
This isn't a Marvel movie. Uh,
Ooh,
yeah, shots fired.
you have now literally made
I know
every Marvel
now
fan
that they're
angry.
going to come at me in the comments again. It's been a while. It's been a while.
That's true.
All right. We do want to focus more on the right wing violence. However, we will pick up back up at the end on some of the left wing violence. It's important to note both the left and the right on the extremes do engage in overt acts of violence. However, as we're going to see here today, the right wing violence goes much further back historically than the left wing violence, which really does start to manifest itself in 1967, 1968.
Okay, fair.
All right. So, feeling pretty good about the conspiracy element, the research, all this sort of stuff.
Well, I always feel good about our research.
All
Yeah.
right. Then our story starts in Italy in 1972 with a bombing.
Oh, of course, because why not?
Yes. Now, everything I'm about to talk to you about comes from a parliamentary investigation of the Italian Senate into the existence of a shadowy group known as Gladio and a series of mysterious massacres that conclude after the end of World War II and during the Cold War. This investigation occurs in the 1990s. However, it reaches back over the decades that make up the Cold War proper, right? Eh, This series of bombings and massacres all come to a head in the 1960s and 70s. So for listeners, really and truly, that's where you want to center yourself. But to understand why these bombings take place, to understand what Gladio was, what Propaganda Due was, what all of these different events were, we do need to reach back a little bit further in time. So we got to do almost like a little bit of pre-context sort of context for this one to really understand what's going on here. All right. So we got our stage set. We're going to hop into those bombings here. But before we can do that, we got to do a little bit of pre-context overall. So in the immediate aftermath of World War II,
Uh-huh.
NATO was highly concerned, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization that brought together the United States, France, England, the western sections of Germany, those allied figures, was highly concerned with Soviet invasions into these now Western aligned countries that had been, purged of their fascist leadership.
And
And
okay, and I'm gonna be honest, that itself, NATO being concerned with that, it's not like Stalin hadn't done stuff that would get them concerned,
yeah,
right?
no,
Setting
anybody
up
who
the
wants to
puppet
say
governments in Eastern Europe. Yeah.
absolutely. Just look at what happened in Czechoslovakia,
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
Like that. I mean, that's the easiest point to and say like this is a real problem. And there was also non-Soviet aligned communist countries that existed in Eastern Europe as well,
Mhm.
notably Yugoslavia.
Yeah.
So what NATO endeavors to do through the CIA is to create a series of what are called stay behind networks. And these were going to be resistance fighters who are going to be outfitted by the West, mainly the United States, but also a huge amount of support from the British to fight against any sort of Soviet invasion or Yugoslavian invasion. And in Italy, where our story is centered, the big fear early on was a Yugoslavian invasion, which is like
Okay.
the first and last time anybody's ever had that fear, right? Like, I don't think anybody's ever been afraid of a Yugoslavian invasion
No.
in history.
No.
None. Okay, just wanted to check
Yeah.
you're in agreement there. Okay.
Yes.
However, the stay behind networks that were created were taken very seriously. Like you said before, the Soviets, Stalin, etc.,
Mhm.
were actually out there doing some big time sort of stuff. So the stay behind networks start to amass weapons, funds, explosives, and stash them in forests, in the basements of churches, in warehouses, all over the Italian countryside. And
To
the thought
combat
here
any kind
being
of communist
exactly,
invasion.
if
Okay.
Italy is overrun, then the behind network can be activated. They'd have weapons, they'd have explosives, they'd have bribery money,
Mhm.
should they need it. They'd have everything that they needed to create like a fifth column, like a French resistance
Okay.
column, or some partisan fighters. The sort of things that did play a major role in undermining the Germans during World War II. So this becomes the overall thought process. The CIA and the Pentagon both produce these units. Eventually, those two units will kind of come together. The CIA unit is known as Gladio, named for the Roman short swords that were used by centurions and gladiators and all that sort of stuff. The Gladio. The Pentagon-based unit was a unit known as the Los Angeles Network. Both of these networks drew heavily from the former um, uh, fascist aligned elements of the society overall,
'Kay, and
right?
that makes sense, like, the hate between the fascists and the communists, that I would think that would be who would be part of these stay behind networks.
100%.
Yeah.
But also, who else is going to be in charge? Right? Like who has governing experience? Who has any sort of capacity to do anything? Look at like what happened in Iraq in 2003 after the decision gets made to purge all the Ba'athist elements from the Iraqi government and to liquidate the army. Almost overnight, the United States created 250,000 terrorists. And people who had some sort of organizing capacity who no longer are in government. And then what happened to the Iraqi government? It never really found its footing in those years until the policy changed. Similarly, we see the same thing start to happen in Italy. All right. Now, before we can get any further, let's double back to how we know this is all true. All right. So here's what we know for sure that in a town called Peteano, I think I got that right. I don't know. It's been a while since I've
People will
tried to
let you know
say.
if you did or
Yeah,
not.
that's true.
Yeah.
But I think it's Peteano, Italy, in 1972. Members of the Italian military police, a group known as the Carabinieri, were called out to a local field to investigate an abandoned vehicle. When they opened the hood, a bomb detonated, killing all three. Yep. 2 days later, a leftist group called the Red Brigade takes credit, right? And in the context of the Cold War, this looks like left wing violence, the sort of thing that the stay behind networks were created
The
to
fight, yeah.
combat
Yeah.
against, right? Now, what I'm about to tell you comes from a May 31st, 1984 investigation led by an Italian judge named Felice Cassano, who is ordered to reopen the case of this Peteano bombing after information regarding a lack of an investigation, lies about the bomb type, were spread by a detective named Marco Morin, who was part of a right wing organization known as the New Order. All
Okay,
right.
so in 1984, Italian judge is told to reopen this case because the lack of information that they had originally makes this a little bit suspicious.
Yes, and
Okay.
this lead investigator, this Marin, has these ties to a right wing organization that is implicated in the years of lead. Right. What Casano finds is that C4, which is a NATO explosive, not a Soviet explosive, was used in this bombing. And the importance of this is magnified when we consider that in February 1972, the same year that the bombing took place, the Carabinieri had found a massive underground weapons cache in the city of Trieste, not too far away, containing, you guessed it, C4. right? Now, news of this massive weapons discovery was not made available to the public. Right, the military and intelligence services seem to have squashed the reporting on this cache of weapons that were discovered. This is notable, though, because in 1972, we're in the midst of the years of lead, right? So it's got to keep all this stuff in mind. Like I said, this is a story that immediately becomes the Charlie Kelly corkboard.
Oh God, it is already. Okay,
Yeah,
so
I
I want to
told
get.
you,
I,
welcome to my world. Your brain is leaking out. Listeners, you cannot see Jen right now,
yeah, because
holding her temples, glasses sliding off her face,
so
eyeballs as big as dinner plates.
so basically, this was originally accused as a leftist bombing, but
Yes.
what evidence in 1984 suggests that this is a rightist bombing.
Right. This is what Kassan starts to find, the
Okay.
investigating member of the Italian judiciary. Right.
Okay.
You still with me?
Yeah, I'm here now. Okay, I'm good.
Okay. So you're with me, right? All right. The unraveling of the Peteano bombing by investigators Kassan eventually finds a connection between the Ordine Nuovo and the military secret police, the SDI, and the link that Kassan makes between these two groups is suggestive that the Peteano bombing was done to frame the Red Brigades, and the Red Brigade taking credit for this is not true. That maybe investigator Marin or somebody else in the New Order phoned in this linkage between the bombing that took place and the Red Brigades. And
Okay,
this
and
requires Cassano then to pull on the thread a little bit more to see what he can unravel.
okay, so once again, the Reds were initially accused. In 1984, they're like, no, it wasn't the Reds because now we have evidence that the bombing was actually based on NATO supplies and C4, and
Mhm.
now we think that the phone call or whatever it was to take credit for this bombing was faked. Okay, so and I'm used to, like, groups blaming each other to try to gain support or we know in the world that people do stuff, to rile up the masses for whatever political gain they can try to get. Why at this time would you do something like that?
Well, strap in.
Oh, great.
Yeah. So Kassan uses this linkage, this evidence, this suggestion, which at this point in time, he's just following the evidence, right? Like I've said, I'm trying to be clear here. Kassan doesn't know what's gone on. He reopens this investigation. Eventually, an arrest is made. The actual bomber is found. And we know that this is the actual bomber because the person confesses, right? And they testify to the existence of this plot to frame the Red Brigade in 1972, to kill the Carabinari,
Uh-huh.
and to raise this fear level of a left wing extremist takeover, right? The bombshell, though, is that the bomber doesn't just say that this was a false flag plot, something that you said, like people
Yeah, it
do
happened
this
all the
from time
time.
to
Not
time,
that it's okay, yeah.
that this took place with the support of NATO and
Oh,
a vast underground network, right? Now, I'm going to quote here from Glasser. The Peteano terror had occurred during a particularly agitated historical period. With the beginning of the Flower Power Revolution, the mass student protests against violence in general, and the war in Vietnam in particular, because side note, editorial note, not just Americans were protesting against the Vietnam War, right? Back to the quote, requote, the ideological battle between the political left and the political right had intensified in Western Europe and the United States in the late 1960s. The vast majority of people engaged in left-wing social movements relied on nonviolent forms of protest, including demonstrations, civil disobedience, and above all, heated debates. Italy had a strong communist and socialist party past within their government and within the population, and indeed, governmental coalitions had been built on left-wing uh, participation. The fear now had become that the left was going to become the overarching governmental leadership group, and as a result, rightist violence needed to take place to unfold this linkage.
so because of a bunch of student protests, Okay, leftist student protests, which students do tend to be leftist, during this agitated time of, the Vietnam War and everything else, they plant this bomb, blame it on the Reds to get more
Mhm.
support for the rights so communism doesn't get an upper hand, or just because they want the protest to die down?
All of the above.
Oh, that's great.
All of the above. Now, to understand fully this NATO linkage, now we've got to do our context. So we've got our
Yeah,
pre-context.
we are literally, I'm looking at our outline, we are literally not even a third of the way through the outline.
No, which again, like listeners, especially in this next section, hop into the outline as you listen through. We're in the actual historical context element of the outline. We're going to move through this pretty quickly, though. So
But this
you
is how
ready?
convoluted this whole damn
This
thing
whole
is.
thing, so
Okay.
Charlie Kelly meme. Charlie
I have to
Kelly
look that meme up
meme.
after we're done
Okay,
here,
we'll
yeah?
post it on Insta for all
Alright.
the people who don't know. Real ones know what I'm talking about. All right, so to understand this linkage and the claims that are being made and the literal non-punny bombshell that has been dropped, we have to go back now to 1945, to Yalta and the end of World War II. Now, we know that, again, there's this huge amount of fear that the Reds were going to take over. So the United States government starts engaging anybody and everybody that they can to try to prop up the Italian government. This includes the mafia and CIA, what will become the CIA, still the OSS at this time. Um, Starts to make connections between people such as Lucky Luciano, who's a mafioso who was freed by the United States in 1943 to help with the invasion of Sicily and the invasion of Italy in 1943 as well. He starts to make links between the existing governmental figures to create what would be essentially a bulwark against communism, backed by the United States and any and all elements that could support a pro-capitalist Western-style democracy in
Uh,
Italy.
yeah, and this is not a unique situation. This was basically the US's or the CIA's MO
Mhm.
during the Cold War. As long as you were anti-communist, they didn't really care where you came from. They didn't care how right-wing you were. They didn't, as long as you were anti-communist, that was basically they thought of that as pro-American democracy.
100%. Look,
Yeah,
look,
that's what it was.
check this out. One notorious fascist leader, a communist killer known as the quote, Black Prince Valerio Borghese, was set to be tried and hung for war crimes, but was rescued by the OSS and later highly influential CIA officer James Jesus Angleton. Do you know anything about James Jesus Angleton?
I don't know anything. Who first of all makes your who as a parent would make your kid's middle name Jesus?
Yeah, and,
That's
and
awfully
yep.
pretentious.
James Jesus Angleton is worth a search for anybody who wants to get into it. He was the chief American Red Hunter within the CIA, a debilitated alcoholic, big time friend and potential co-conspirator with Kim Philby, who was the highest level of penetration by the KGB within MI5 and MI6 in England. Like James Jesus Angleton is an architect of the Cold War, and he produces like this midnight ride sort of raid to rescue the Black Prince, a member of what would in Italy, the best analog for this Italian group would be the German SS,
Mhm.
right? He's like the Heimlich.
Don't say Heimler.
Yeah. I know, right? Got to be careful here with
Sorry.
this one.
Sorry, Steve.
Heinrich Himmler figure of the Italian communist, hunters, and this is a very bad person. He gets incorporated into these governmental resistance group as well. And the whole goal of all of this is to make sure that in 1948, when the first post-fascist elections take place, that Italy doesn't turn into a communist state. And Italy has by far and away the most robust communist party
Yes.
in existence in Europe during this time period. So the United States pumps in like $10 million. They work with this really coordinated propaganda campaign. And lo and behold, the Christian Democrats are able to emerge victorious. And this creates this kind of boom time period where a pro-capitalist, anti-communist centrist government takes over. And all through the 1940s
Can I
and
interrupt
50s.
just one
Yes,
second?
go
Because
for it.
here's why. I'm sorry, I can't get this out of my head. So this Red Hunter, James Jesus Angleton,
He's the American CIA
right,
guy.
okay,
Yep.
and this Black Prince.
hmm
Do you know the video game Dead by Daylight?
No.
My son loves it. It's basically you're like these horrible this is I'm a terrible parent. Here you go. It's this horrible game where like these serial killers and villains and these awful characters from like slasher films go around and try to kill all the survivors, or you can play the survivors and try to get down the serial killers, right? Dude, I am totally thinking we should create a video game based on the Red Hunter and Black Prince. And I'm telling you, I 'cause that's
The
what it
story
seems
writes
like.
itself. I mean, what we're
It does.
telling right
That's
now.
this seems more like a vicious video game and these horrible villains than it does seem reality. I'm
If
sorry, I
you
couldn't.
if you put this together in a screenplay and pitch this as a Hollywood movie, people would be like, "No, it's too on the nose." This is too on like, this is what people think conspiracies are. It is.
And this actually
This
is
is real
it.
conspiracy. Now, if it's not clear, the US backing, the pro-fascisti, the FAR guys and all these other guys that we
Mhm.
talked about before, they're all instrumental in the creation of this more stable American-aligned, NATO-aligned government within Italy. Now, in order to make sure that the pendulum doesn't swing back, the United States engages in the creation of these stay-behind networks, and this can be documented and evidenced through the 1951 National Security Council Resolution 67-3, which basically just allows for the creation of the Gladio networks. The Gladio networks are going to draw heavily from people identified by the Black Prince, who are all hardcore super fascists who are more likely and willing to perpetrate violence against communists. The like implicit sort of piece of this that we should note right now is that these communists don't necessarily have to be Yugoslavian communists. They don't necessarily
No,
have
of
to be
course not.
Soviet communists. These could be Italian communists, and almost half of the electorate in Italy are either socialists or communists who have now like created a political coalition in the 1950s known as the Popular Front. So we have a secret army funded by NATO made up of ex-fascisti who are arming and training to fight against this front, this National Front or Popular Front coalition that's emerging to counterbalance the pro-NATO, pro-capitalist governmental order in Italy.
So, well, and
You look
this
disappointed right now
I'm not
in the West.
I'm not no, because I know that this happened during the Cold War, right? And I don't I lived during the Cold War, you know, where they told you to get under your desk in
Oh,
case,
yeah, we
a
did a
nuclear
great
bomb
series by
exploded.
that listener. If you wanna check that out, we had a good guest on. You guys had a whole '80s reminiscence. Check that out in our
Yeah.
Cold War series. I think that was the second episode of that series.
And I understand, like, we can look back in hindsight and think how ridiculous this all was because the Soviet Union was a lot weaker than what we thought, right? But they did not know that at the time. They didn't.
Fair.
So I at least understand the fear of communists spreading from a Cold War perspective. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, and
Eh,
just to underscore that point real fast for
yeah.
listeners, CIA agent and later CIA director William Colby said in 1958, where he was working in Italy, quote, "My job, simply put, was to prevent Italy from being taken over by communists during the elections."
Right. And but like you said, Italy had one of the most robust communist movements in the entirety of Western Europe. So
Mhm.
so I get the fear. And I know that the CIA and NATO were involved in a ton of things during this time period, right? To prevent the spread of communism. But when we start not we, I wasn't there. When we are literally supporting someone known as the Black Prince
Mhm.
and getting mafiosos free,
Yep.
at some point, did anyone think maybe we're taking this a bit too far?
No, they were thinking they weren't taking it far enough. In the mid-1950s, the United States, NATO, and MI6, which is like the militarized wing of British intelligence for those who are not in the
Isn't it
know.
basically the British intelligence CIA?
Yeah, yeah,
Okay, okay.
the paramilitary side of
Yeah,
it
yeah,
all.
yeah.
Send over RAF, Royal Air Force, soldiers to help with escape and evasion training, and the British SAS, which was the premier special forces service in the world until the 1980s when the United States eventually supplants them. Maybe not. Those might be fighting words. I don't know. At any rate, To train these Gladio fighters, there is a secret Gladio base that is created where covert action could be launched from. There's explosives, small arms training, infiltration, and surveillance training that takes place. And in the 1950s, Gladio isn't just an element of the stay behind network and potential communist reaction force, it becomes part of a suppression force. And all of this comes to a head in the 1950s and 1960s when, and again, please check out the outline listener for this because I don't want to get too deep into the weeds and read all this through. Essentially, there's a series of potential coups that take place. And in multiple instances, the Black Prince and some of these far right fascisti oriented individuals start to become more convinced that the communists are going to win in the elections and that an actual full-on coup needs to take place. And so we have one in 1954. There's another one in 1960 where the Gladio soldiers are deployed into major Italian cities. They go to radio stations. They go to newspaper offices. They stage themselves around governmental offices. And in every instance, are poised to execute a full-on coup to dissolve the democratically elected governments of Italy to institute what Julius Evola, the core philosopher
Uh-huh.
of the rightist fascist movement in Italy during this time, would call a super fascist.
So
So,
so basically this group has gone from, "Hey, in case there's an invasion from Yugoslavia, we wanna be ready," to now more what I would not in a positive way, but more proactive work to
mhm.
make sure that no communist element in Italy, any kind of communist element, can get a foothold in anything.
Yep. Yeah, in 1954 and 1963, there's these coups that just don't materialize. We know a lot about this because of the, questioning of this Gladio commander, this guy named Renzo Rocca,
Mhm,
who gives open testimony about the existence of these networks and the nefarious role that they're playing within society.
mhm.
In one instance, the coup doesn't occur because the Soviet Union gets word of this through their own internal KGB contacts within the communist parties in Italy and sends warships into the Mediterranean to dissuade some sort of takeover, which then backs the pro-communist forces or pro-fascist forces off. It's just a true mess.
This is a cluster.
Yeah. However, what we can read out of this is that this sort of covert, starting to become more overt right-wing fascist movement didn't have the broad support of the people. And so something deeper underground, something deeper, more obscured was going to need to be used in order to instantiate the right-wing government that these pro-fascisti were hoping to create. And that's an
And then
excellent place for us to pick up our
yeah.
story next week.
Good God.
Yep. This is I told you. I told you. This is insane.
Why did you keep reading this book? Wouldn't you I would have stopped and I'm like, "Nope. Nope.
Because, like, when you
Nope."
first look at this, when you first hear about this and, like, some of the podcasts that I listen to and things that I, like, for fun, I kept hearing all these references to Gladio and I was like, "I don't really know what this is." I've heard about some of this sort of stuff, and then, a couple years ago, I came across this article in the Washington Post that was like a deep investigation into what was being alleged during some of these Gladio hearings that we referenced in the 1990s at the top of the episode, and I was like, wow, this seems to have some legs. This seems to be more true than not. And then I also have to just the Netflix series The Octopus Murders. I don't know if
Seen
you're
that. Nope.
familiar with that one. It's another one of those kind of mind melting things that I started to get into, and all of this stuff is so convoluted. It's so wacky that you think of it as being conspiracy theory.
Like, it can't possibly be true. You got
But
sucked
then
down the rabbit hole.
but then you start actually looking at this and the number of, like, people who are looking at records and interviews and court testimonies and what historians would say are like full on true documentary elements of our history are saying like, no, this is real. This is real.
Nice.
And the historians and stuff might quibble a little bit here and there and say like, maybe Gladio wasn't that important, or maybe this other network was more important, or this thing or that thing. Nobody is questioning whether or not this is true. They're kind of quibbling about what's going on in the margins
Yeah.
overall.
All right.
This is insane.
So what's up for the next part of this episode?
So next week, when we hop into our next round of this, we're going to take a deeper dive look into a covert, shadowy CIA-linked group of individuals operating out of a Freemasons lodge. Uh-huh. And again, audio medium. They can't see your face.
Oh, I know. I
You
just
can't
cannot.
make this up, right? With the support of the, let's just call them the Italian version of J. Edgar Hoover.
Oh, nice.
And then we'll actually get into the real bombings, and murders and
Yeah, we're not
violence.
even that's what's
No,
crazy
we're
is we're
not
not even
even
there
there
yet.
yet. They're not even there yet to understand, because otherwise it just looks like this random explosion of violence in the late 1960s and 70s, which is what it looked like to a lot of people. And it's only through the delving deeper into this history and looking at the potential coups and the empowerment of the fascisti and the Black Prince and all these nefarious actors that you can really start to make sense and consume the years of lead properly, right? So we had to do the pre-context. We had to do the context. Like this whole episode was just context
Oh
because
my
this is
God.
how crazy this is.
All right. So for the next time, we were going to talk about how it's going to get 1,000 times worse.
That's right. It really does get 1,000
That's
times
lovely.
worse. Yep.
Well, you guys, thank you so much for joining us again today. I promise at some point we might get a happier episode. It's just not going to be anytime soon.
4 seasons of saying that.
I know. Why bother anymore? So, thank you for joining us. And until next time, see you later.
Bye.